The screen is pitch black. The sound of a heavy, iron gate slamming shut echoes like a thunderclap. A heartbeat sound effect thumps loudly, drowning out the silence. They say a debt is paid with money. But some debts are so deep, so dangerous, they can only be paid with a life. Jennifer didn't walk into the glass castle to find a husband. She walked in to sacrifice herself to two men who shared a face, but possessed two very different souls. One was the fire that would burn her alive. The other was the ice that would freeze her heart. She was the payment, but she had no idea that the receipt would be stamped on her very soul. Welcome to Afro-Korean Soul Tales. As we go on, please like, share, and subscribe to enjoy more stories. The city of Seoul was dissolving. Outside the tinted glass of the luxury sedan, the neon metropolis was nothing more than a smeared watercolor painting of electric blues and bleeding reds. Rain lashed against the window pane, weeping in rhythm with the chaotic drumming of Jennifer's heart. She sat rigid in the back seat, her fingers laced together so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned the color of bleached bone. The dress she wore, a fluid cascade of midnight blue silk, felt like a lie. It was too soft, too expensive, too elegant for a girl who felt like she was being marched to the gallows. She wasn't Jennifer anymore. Not really. Jennifer was the girl who laughed too loud in her father's cramped electronic shop in Lagos, the girl who smelled like solder fumes and spicy jollof rice, the girl who dreamed of simple things. This woman in the reflection of the darkened window was a currency, a transaction. Her father's voice still echoed in the back of her skull, trembling and broken. The debt wasn't just a number, it was a death sentence. It was a cavernous hole that threatened to swallow her entire lineage, to erase the name they had built over generations. The solution had arrived not with a handshake, but with a dossier. A contract thicker than a Bible, bound in legal threats and unthinkable promises. It was an arrangement, a marriage. But the singularity of the word marriage was the deception. She wasn't promised to a man. She was promised to them. The car began to slow, the tires crunching over wet gravel, a sound that felt like teeth grinding together. Jennifer looked up, her breath hitching in a throat that felt lined with sandpaper. They had arrived. The gates were monstrous. Immense rods of black iron twisted into shapes that looked like vines, or perhaps chains. As the car approached, the gates groaned open, an automated welcome that felt more like a mouth yawning wide to swallow them whole. The vehicle glided forward, sliding up a winding driveway that seemed to go on for miles, cutting through manicured gardens that were too perfect to be real. The grass was a uniform emerald, the hedges sliced into geometric precision. It was beautiful, and it was terrifying. At the summit of the hill stood the residence. To call it a house was an insult to architecture. It was a fortress of solitude constructed from glass and stone. It jutted out from the landscape like a shard of crystal, cold and imposing, with floor-to-ceiling windows that reflected the stormy night sky, making the structure look invisible and omnipresent all at once. This was the sanctuary of Jin-woo and Jin-woo Han, the Billionaire twins. The rumors about them in the underbelly of the business world were whispered in hushed tones, men of godlike influence, inseparable, and possessed of a shared, peculiar appetite for the rare and the exquisite. And, tonight, Jennifer was the rare antique they had purchased. The car stopped. The silence that followed was heavier than the engine's hum. The driver's door opened, but Jennifer didn't move. She couldn't. Her legs felt like they had been filled with lead. She took a breath, holding it, trying to force her heart to stop hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird desperate for the sky. Just survive, she whispered to herself. Just walk. The door swung open. A woman stood there, holding a black umbrella. She was severe, dressed in a suit so crisp it could cut skin, her hair pulled back into a bun that allowed no strand to escape. "Miss Jennifer," the woman said. It wasn't a greeting, it was a confirmation of delivery. Jennifer stepped out into the damp air. The rain was held at bay by the umbrella, but the chill of the mountain air seeped instantly through the thin silk of her dress. She followed the woman toward the towering front doors, which stood 12 feet high, made of dark, polished wood. Inside, The house was a cathedral of minimalism. The floors were white marble, veined with gray, stretching out like a frozen sea. The air smelled of ozone and expensive cologne. There was no clutter, no warmth, no sign of life. It echoed with the sharp clack-clack-clack of the housekeeper's heels and the softer, hesitant shuffle of Jennifer's sandals. It felt like a museum where touching was forbidden, a beautiful shell devoid of a soul. "Wait here," the housekeeper commanded. They had entered a library. It was the first room that felt like it belonged to humans. Walls lined with thousands of books rose to a vaulted ceiling, and a massive fireplace roared with burning logs, casting dancing shadows against the leather armchairs. The housekeeper turned on her heel and vanished, the heavy oak door clicking shut, leaving Jennifer drowning in the sudden quiet. She stood in the center of the Persian rug, trembling. She was 19 years old. 19. She had never been properly kissed. Her romantic experience was limited to the paperback novels she hid under her pillow and the K-dramas she binged on her phone late at night, dreaming of a love that was soft and kind. She was a virgin in every sense of the word, untouched by man, untouched by the cruelty of the world. And now, she was standing in the lion's den, waiting to be devoured. The word virgin felt like a neon brand seared onto her forehead. She wrapped her arms around her torso, trying to hold herself together, staring into the fire. The handle of the far door turned. The sound was like a gunshot in the silence. Jennifer spun around, her breath catching. Two figures stepped into the room, moving with a synchronization that was almost supernatural. They were identical. And yet, in the flicker of the firelight, Jennifer knew instantly that they were as different as day and night. They were tall, towering over 6 feet, with broad shoulders that tapered into tailored suits which cost more than her father's entire shop. Their faces were sculpted from the same divine blueprint: high, sharp cheekbones, jawlines that could cut glass, and hair styled in sweeping dark waves. But the energy radiating from them polarized the room. The tension in this room is thick enough to choke on. Can you feel her heart racing? If this story is gripping you, tap the like button right now so we know you're watching. Don't forget to subscribe to Afro-Korean Soul Tales and turn on notifications. We are just getting started, and you won't believe where this night leads. Now back to the library. The man on the right moved first. He had a looseness to his gait, a fluid grace. A small, easy smile played on his lips, and his eyes, a warm, molten brown, crinkled at the corners as he assessed her. "Jennifer," he said. His voice was a revelation. It was like warm honey poured over gravel, smooth and sweet, his Korean accent wrapping around the syllables of her name like a caress. "I am Sunwoo. It is truly wonderful to finally meet you. The photographs did not do justice. You are radiant." His words were a life raft. Jennifer felt her shoulders drop an inch. He wasn't a monster. He was charming. He was light. But then her gaze drifted to the left. Jin-woo. He had not moved. He stood perfectly still, like a statue carved from obsidian. His arms were crossed over his chest, creating a barrier between him and the world. His eyes were the same shape, the same color as his brother's, but where Sunwoo's were a hearth fire, Jin-woo's were a frozen lake in the dead of winter. He didn't look at her. He dismantled her. He studied her fear, the pulse jumping in her throat, the way she clutched her arms. He didn't smile. He didn't blink. The silence coming from him was a physical weight, heavier than all of Sunwoo's pleasantries combined. Sunwoo continued to speak, filling the suffocating air with chatter about the flight, the rain, the view of Seoul from the terrace, anything to stop the trembling of the girl in blue. He was trying, and Jennifer wanted to cry with gratitude for his kindness. But she couldn't take her eyes off Jin-woo. He was the storm on the horizon. Finally, Jin-woo uncrossed his arms. The sound of fabric rustling was deafening. He took a single, slow step forward. The room seemed to shrink. "It is time we set the rules," Jin-woo said. His voice was a low rumble, a subwoofer vibration that Jennifer felt in the soles of her feet. It wasn't loud, but it commanded absolute, terrified attention. Sunwoo fell silent immediately, his smile fading into a look of respectful seriousness. Jin-woo's eyes locked onto hers. You understand the arrangement, Jennifer. You are ours. Both of ours. There is no choosing. He paused, letting the sentence hang in the air like smoke. The marriage is to the name Han. Your life is with both of us. Your loyalty is to both of us. And your nights. His gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, darkening with an intensity that made her knees weak. Belong to both of us. He took another step. He was close now. Too close. She could smell him, a scent of rain, cedarwood, and something dangerously clean. He leaned in, invading her personal space until her world narrowed down to nothing but his icy stare. You will take both of us. Tonight. The statement slammed into her. It wasn't a question. It wasn't a request. It was a decree, as unchangeable as gravity. It stole the oxygen from her lungs. There was no room for negotiation. Her fate had been sealed before she even stepped on the plane. The hours that followed were a blur of anxiety. A silent dinner where silver forks clicked against porcelain plates and Sunwoo tried to make conversation while Jin-woo ate in brooding silence. And then the ascent. They led her up the grand, curving staircase. Her heart was a frantic drum solo. They didn't take her to a guest room. They walked her to the master suite, a room larger than her family's entire apartment in Lagos. It was dominated by a bed that looked like an island, vast and draped in sheets of charcoal gray silk. The door clicked shut. The masks fell away. In the privacy of the sanctuary, the brothers changed. Sunwoo's charm distilled into a focused, tender warmth. Jin-woo's coldness heated up into a watchful, predatory intensity. They stood before her. Jennifer felt like a deer caught in headlights, exposed and trembling. Sunwoo reached out first. His fingers were gentle, brushing a stray lock of her dark weave away from her cheek. It is okay to be nervous, Jennifer, he whispered, his eyes soft. We will be gentle. We want you to feel worshipped. Then, Jin-woo moved. He didn't speak. He simply lifted his large hand and cupped the side of her face. His touch was shocking, firm, possessive, hot. His thumb traced the line of her jaw, claiming the bone structure as his property. A shiver violently rattled down her spine. Sunwoo leaned in. He pressed his lips to hers. It was her first kiss. It was soft, tasting of wine and mint. It was exploring, sweet, a question asked with tenderness. It felt like the romance novels promised. Butterflies, a warm flutter in her stomach, a sigh. But as Sunwoo pulled away, smiling against her lips, Jin-woo was there. He didn't wait. He tilted her chin up, his eyes blazing. Now me, he murmured, a husky command. His kiss was nothing like his brother's. It wasn't a question. It was the answer. It was demanding, hungry, a conquering force. He kissed her deeply, his tongue sweeping into her mouth, claiming her breath, her taste, her very essence. Jennifer grabbed his shoulders to keep from falling, her head spinning. They worked in a terrifyingly perfect harmony. Sunwoo's hands were soft, unzipping the blue silk dress with reverence, while Jin-woo held her gaze, his hands gripping her waist to keep her steady against the onslaught of sensation. The dress pooled at her feet. She stood in her simple cotton undergarments, feeling more naked than she ever had in her life. She braced herself for judgment. But there was none. Beautiful, Sunwoo breathed, genuine awe in his voice. Jin-woo said nothing. He just gave a slow, single nod, his eyes burning a trail of fire down her skin. They led her to the bed. The world dissolved into a haze of touch and shadow. The softness of the sheets, the heat of two bodies surrounding her, the contrast of their skin against hers. Sunwoo was the teacher, his hands patient, showing her where to touch, guiding her through the map of her own pleasure. Jin-woo was the storm, his hands bold, learning the curves of her body with a confident possessiveness that left her gasping. They took turns kissing her, touching her, worshipping her until the fear evaporated, replaced by a rising, unfamiliar tide of need. When the final moment came, the The moment the girl became a woman, it was Sun-woo who held her close, his body moving with a gentle, rocking rhythm, whispering praises in her ear. But Jennifer's head was turned to the side. Her eyes were locked with Jin-woo's. He was lying beside them, propped up, watching. His expression was a mix of fierce pride and raw, unadulterated desire. He held her hand, his grip strong, anchoring her to the earth while his brother sent her soaring. It was for Jin-woo that she finally let out a soft cry, not of pain, but of surrender. A release of the old life, and a terrifying, thrilling acceptance of the new. As the night settled into a deep, velvet quiet, Jennifer lay nestled between the two powerful men who were now her husbands. Sun-woo was asleep instantly, his arm thrown heavily across her waist. But on her other side, Jin-woo was awake. His body was turned toward her, his hand resting on her hip, his fingers tapping a silent rhythm against her skin. She was no longer Jennifer from the electronics shop. She was theirs. And as she closed her eyes, the last emotion she felt wasn't regret. It was a confusing, intoxicating sense of belonging. Morning arrived with golden stripes of sunlight cutting across the tangled sheets. Jennifer woke slowly, the memories of the night returning not as a nightmare, but as a heavy, warm reality. The space beside her was empty. Sun-woo was gone. But Jin-woo remained. He was propped on one elbow, watching her sleep. In the daylight, his eyes were unreadable. There was no good morning.
No smile.
Just a long, silent look that made her heart flip in her chest. He stared at her for a moment longer, then rose from the bed without a word and disappeared into the bathroom. This silence became the rhythm of her new life. Weeks turned into months in the glass castle above Seoul. Jennifer was given the world. Her wardrobe was filled with designer clothes softer than clouds. Her jewelry box glittered with stones she had only seen in magazines. She had freedom, luxury, and safety. But the true texture of her life was defined by the two men she married. Sun-woo was the sun. He was bright, energetic, and omnipresent. He became her best friend. He planned elaborate dates, helicopter rides over the Han River where she laughed until her sides hurt, shopping sprees in Gangnam where he insisted on buying anything she glanced at for more than 2 seconds. He listened to her stories about Nigeria with a captivated smile. He was affectionate, kissing her in the hallways, holding her hand at breakfast, telling her she was the light of the house. Loving Sun-woo was easy. It was natural like breathing. Jin-woo was the moon. He was distant, often disappearing into his home office for 10 hours at a time. He spoke little. At first, Jennifer thought he hated her. She thought he regretted the arrangement. Every time he walked past her without a word, she felt a sting of rejection. But then, she began to notice the quiet things. One rainy Tuesday, she mentioned offhandedly to Sun-woo that she missed her mother's pepper soup, the spicy, fish-based broth that cured any sadness. Sun-woo had smiled and nodded. But the next evening, sitting on the dining table, was a steaming ceramic bowl. It smelled perfect. It tasted like home. Jin-woo was at the head of the table, reading a financial newspaper, ignoring everyone. But Jennifer saw the slight twitch in his jaw as she took the first spoon.
He had done this.
He had found a chef, or perhaps a recipe, and demanded perfection. He never said a word, but the soup spoke volumes.
Then came the gala.
It was a suffocating event filled with Seoul's elite. Sun-woo was the perfect date, dancing with her, introducing her, charming the room. But Jin-woo stood at the perimeter, a dark sentinel holding a glass of scotch he never drank. Later in the night, a drunk investor cornered Jennifer near the balcony. He was too close, his breath sour, his hand reaching out to touch her arm with a sleazy familiarity. Jennifer froze, panic rising. Before the man's fingers could graze her skin, a shadow fell over them. Jin-woo materialized out of the darkness. He didn't shout. He didn't make a scene. He simply stepped between Jennifer and the man. He stared at the investor with eyes so cold they could freeze hell over. The air pressure dropped. The investor sobered up instantly, mumbled a terrified apology, and practically ran away. Jin-woo didn't turn to Jennifer and say, "I will protect you." He didn't ask if she was okay. He simply placed a firm, large hand on the small of her back and guided her away from the crowd. His touch burned through the silk of her gown. His love wasn't poetry. It was physics. It was action and reaction. It was silent protection. And this was the war that began to rage inside Jennifer's heart. It wasn't a battle between good and evil. It was a battle between the sun and the moon. When she was with Sunwoo, she felt happy, cherished, and light. But when Jin-woo was in the room, her body hummed with a nervous, electric energy. She found herself desperate for his approval, hungry for his rare, intense touches. The nights were where the confusion hurt the most. In the dark, their approaches mirrored their souls. Sunwoo made love to her with sweetness, ensuring she was happy. But Jin-woo, when it was his turn, the dynamic shifted. He was primal. He would look into her eyes, holding her gaze captive. His hands claimed, his kisses devoured. He made her feel a powerful, aching need she didn't know she possessed. She began to crave that intensity, that feeling of being utterly consumed by the moon. The breaking point came on a Thursday afternoon. Jennifer was in the garden with Sunwoo. He was telling a joke, and the sun was shining. It was a perfect picture. She laughed, tilting her head back. Then, she glanced up at the house. Standing in the window of the third-floor office was a silhouette. Jin-woo. He was watching them. Even from this distance, she could feel the weight of his gaze, heavy with a longing he would never voice. Her laughter died. A terrifying realization crystallized in her chest. She wasn't just falling for both of them. She was in love with both of them, but differently. She loved Sunwoo like a partner, a joy. But she loved Jin-woo with a desperate, hungry passion that felt like it was carved into her bones. The guilt crashed down on her. How could one heart hold two such different loves? Was she betraying Sunwoo by craving Jin-woo's darkness? Was she betraying Jin-woo by reveling in Sunwoo's light? She began to withdraw. The house, usually filled with her laughter, went quiet. She avoided their eyes. The tension in the glass castle became a thick fog. The brothers exchanged worried glances, their telepathic bond sensing the fracture in their wife, but neither knew how to fix it. The explosion happened in the library. The three of them were gathered there after dinner. The rain was hammering against the windows again, a callback to the night she arrived. Sunwoo was trying to show her a book on art. Jin-woo was by the fire, staring at the flames. Jennifer felt the walls closing in. The duality of her heart was tearing her apart. She stood up abruptly, the chair screeching against the floor. "I can't do this," she whispered. The tears she had been holding back for weeks spilled over. "I'm so sorry." She turned to flee, to run, to hide. But a hand shot out and caught her wrist. It wasn't Sunwoo. It was Jin-woo. He had crossed the room in 3 impossible strides. His grip was iron, yet somehow careful not to bruise. "You can't do what, Jennifer?" he asked. His voice was rough, cracked with emotion she had never heard before. "This," she cried, gesturing wildly between him and Sunwoo. I can't figure out my own heart. It's not fair to you. It's not fair to him. I love you both, but it's different, and it's messy, and I feel like I'm breaking in half." She sobbed, her shoulders shaking, her confession hanging in the air like a grenade. Silence followed. Then Sunwoo spoke. He walked over, his face not angry, but soft with understanding. "Jennifer, look at me." She turned her tear-streaked face to him. "Did you ever think," Sunwoo said softly, "that maybe it is supposed to be different?" He took her other hand. "We are not the same men. We are 2 different souls who love the same woman. We do not expect you to love us the same way." Jin-woo's grip on her wrist softened, shifting from a restraint to an anchor. He stepped closer, forcing her to look at him. "The only thing that is wrong," Jin-woo said, his dark eyes boring into hers, "is you trying to tear yourself in 2. You are ours. Both of ours. Your heart is big enough for both because it is our heart. It belongs to this family. To the 3 of us." His words sliced through the confusion like a blade. They weren't asking her to choose. They were asking her to accept, to stop fighting the unique shape of their love. A wave of relief, so powerful it nearly knocked her over, washed through her body. She looked at Sunwoo's warm, accepting face. She looked at Jin-woo's fierce, possessive gaze. And the war inside her ended. She took a deep, shuddering breath. "You are two halves of my whole heart," she whispered. "I love the sun and I love the moon. I don't want to choose." She squeezed both their hands. "I choose both. I choose us." What happened after that confession was a transformation. The fog in the house lifted, replaced by a brilliant, clear light. The brothers, freed from the fear that she would eventually pick one and leave the other, opened their hearts completely. The intimacy deepened. The jealousy evaporated. There was only the three of them, a perfect, balanced triangle of love and desire. Sunwoo's tender worship taught her the beauty of intimacy, while Jinwoo's fierce possession showed her the power of raw passion. Together, they made her feel like the most powerful woman in the world. Years flowed by like a gentle river. The glass and stone fortress was no longer cold. It was warm, lived in, filled with the chaos of toys and the sound of running feet. Jennifer stood in the sun-drenched garden, looking out over the view of Seoul. She was no longer the scared girl in the blue dress. She was a woman of substance, radiant and secure. She watched the scene on the lawn. Two little boys were chasing a butterfly. One had Sunwoo's bright, easy smile. The other had Jinwoo's serious, contemplative eyes. Sunwoo came up behind her, wrapping his arms around her waist, resting his chin on her shoulder. "They have your energy, my love," he whispered, kissing her neck. A moment later, Jin-woo stood beside her. He didn't wrap his arms around her. Instead, his hand found hers, his fingers lacing with hers in that familiar, unbreakable grip. He looked at their joined hands, then at the children, and finally at her. For the first time since she met him, Jennifer saw the frozen lake of his eyes melt completely. They were filled with a love so deep, so profound, it needed no words. They were not two men and one wife. They were one family, one unique, beautiful, unbreakable unit. They had faced the world's judgment and their own doubts, and they had built a forever on their own terms. They no longer battled in her sky. They simply took turns shining down on their beautiful, complete world. A world built on the promise that one heart, when it is true and brave, is indeed big enough for two great loves. If you've been swept away by the passionate, unconventional love story of Jennifer, Jinwoo, and Sunwoo, and you want to discover more romances that defy the rules, then you are in the right place. This channel, Afro-Korean Soul Tales, is dedicated to stories that make your heart pound and your soul believe in destiny.
There are so many more secrets to share.
Make sure you are subscribed and hit that notification bell so you never miss a beat. Your next unforgettable love story is just one click away. I'll see you in the next video.